So good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo and this is Monday Live. Actually, I've gone way ahead of myself there. So this is what we do every Monday at 3 o'clock Eastern. Get us get through the pandemic and figure out what's on the other side for commercial buildings. A list of the profiles of the members here are on mondaylive.org. Just a reminder that the views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. Please do post questions and comments on the Zoom tools and answer the survey at the end after the show, if you don't mind. This deck, it's actually quite a lot on this deck today. Will actually be on mondaylive.org if you want to refer to it. Our agenda today, we'll just have a chit chat about what's going on. And then our main topic is edge versus cloud, that not being a binary choice. That's kind of the discussion topic for today. This sort of follows on last week's conversation about the edge, which was really quite good. As usual, we have a few slides to get us sort of going. Roger Woodward talking about WeWork and Uber. I'm sure he'll explain that in a minute. Ken Sinclair just sort of continuing the requesting innovation thing. I'm not sure if there's much more that you can talk about that today, Ken, but we'll give you a chance. Mark, this is from last week. I don't know if you want to continue this dialogue. And then Anna Scholten talking about video analytics, again, part of the sort of edge and cloud sort of discussion that we've been having. And that's it for now. We'll have some more slides in a minute. So let me throw it out to the group. Who wants to start? Roger is not here, so who wants to start? Ken, anything new on your side? Ken?
Well, we're hard at getting the issue out. And of course, we're trying to take people to take a serious look at this request for proposal. And it seems like there's a few people that are doing that. We've also picked up on your theme here from last week and carrying it forward into the edge is the next new wave. And we're seeing that that's going to hit us pretty quick now as we come out of COVID. We're starting to see the edge is becoming a much more significant architecture combined with the cloud and how that all going to work. So today's session is really very much what we're talking about in our December issue. We still got a little bit of time if anybody wants to contribute and add any comments to that. We'd love to have them.
Great. I think that will be quite an interesting issue next month. So Anna, do you want to jump into this?
Yes, I was going to ask. I talked about the video analytics last week from a perspective of edge to cloud, and my perspective was video analytics makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense at the edge because of the volume of data that a video typically generates and the possibilities that video generates, right, from data, from results perspective. But then it occurred to me, when we talked about edge or cloud, it's not binary. The real question I had was, can there be edge without cloud? Does that even make sense?
It's like a donut with a hole in it, or something like that.
Yeah, reverse donut.
Kind of like a hole without a donut.
Oh, without the donut hole. There you go.
Interesting.
Yeah. It does. Maybe later up when we get into the topic, I'll comment on that. We actually have some applications that way.
Oh, interesting. I got it. When I was thinking about the video thing, the video analytics only makes sense with cloud, or at least some, host-based server that takes the data and does results with. So I was kind of fascinated with other use cases of edge without cloud.
Yeah, I think it's whenever you have a large volume of data, analytics is a key way to present that because there's so much data, right? But there's lots of other applications where you have too much data at the end to flow it all to the cloud because of whatever your network limitations are, right? Again, video is a great example of that. But what about just having edge devices out there and a URL you can go to that allows you to tunnel through to the edge? You're not bringing the data to the cloud. You're using some type of cloud, like a DNS almost, to just say, hey, I want to get a list of all of my edge devices that I can tunnel directly through, and I'll see what's happening. I am not bringing all that data to any cloud. But you know what it creates? An environment where someone who's used to working with the cloud, they go to a URL and they get to where they want to go. They don't know, they don't care that you haven't aggregated all the data in one place.
Okay, yeah, I like it. Like more of an infrastructure solution approach,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So we're definitely seeing applications deployed that way.
We have an example that's similar to that where it's not a traditional use of the cloud, and that is fielded IoT devices. When they're first getting onto their local Wi-Fi infrastructure, we've created, as part of our install portal, a bit of a server that has a hash function on it. So when the installer powers up the device, they log into our portal separately. They get a kind of a one-time code that they then enter into the device. The device pulls up a page that allows them to get onto the local Wi-Fi at the customer's location and enter their credentials, and then the device sends up to our cloud, and we know it's already authenticated because of that.
So those kinds of
security application only, no data.
So those kinds of infrastructure, I think it begs the question: is that edge or cloud, right? Or it's a combination of the two.
Well, to me, in this case, we've got an intelligent processing unit that's local on premise, and that's doing, that's got the horsepower. It's doing all the stuff locally there, and the only use of quote unquote the cloud is to host this security function.
Right.
So it's
So
not a traditional application where you're passing data up or the cloud is responsible for doing processing or anything like that.
So would you say that's akin to what John was just saying? So it's more of an infrastructure solution than it is a data solution, right? Okay.
Yeah. It is technically it's a subset. Eventually they'll go to the cloud. Sorry, Roger.
Yes.
Eventually they'll connect to our cloud and there'll be data, but this part of it is just the install management piece. So.
I was going to say, I guess it's more of a flatter architecture, because if you're looking after multiple buildings, you might be wanting to pick data from all the sites and picking out different data from that kind of, as John said, almost like tunneling through. But it means then you've got pretty much a flat architecture, even with the server or the cloud element.
Yeah, you've got a flat architecture, all the data at the edge, but your users interact as if it's a single unified cloud, right?
Yeah.
They go, they pick a list. I want to look at these 5 sites. They get the data on their screen even to look at the results. Maybe the results are KPIs, whatever. But none of the data was ever centralized or aggregated to the server.
I think the only other challenge, Johnny, is like we were saying earlier with the CCTV, and that's the amount of storage. If you want a lot of historical data, then do you really want to disperse all your storage around at the site level as well as some centralized location, especially with CCTV, for instance?
Yeah. So Roger, you also put up a slide to do with WeWork, but make it Uber. Could you explain?
Yeah, it seems like that they're going to really make it flexible, that you can just call and book a desk for, I think it was $29, is it, or something? And you can book a meeting room by $10 an hour. So instead of taking some time out in a building or, whatever floor or an area, you can literally just, take a desk for a day and it'll cost you $29. You want a meeting room, it's $10 a day. And they're rolling out across all the cities in the US. It's been trialing in New York. But they're now actually talking about rolling out across the US completely with all the buildings down.
So this is a WeWork product then? It's a WeWork.
Yeah.
So
does it-
Steve just asked a question, has any of us worked in a WeWork environment? No from me.
I've been in meetings. I've been with customers and other people who are using both. It works. You've got the coffee shop. You know, there is someone at the entrance, kind of acting as security. Someone has to come down and collect you and vouch for you. There's normally a coffee shop, and then you go on a floor, and there's just like 20 companies with little banners at the top, some desks actually just saying the name of their company and things like that. And meeting rooms are just booked. That seemed to be the bottleneck whenever I've attended them, is trying to get meeting rooms.
Yeah, I'd echo that, Roger. I haven't worked in a WeWorks, but I've been to customers who are in WeWorks, and that seemed to be the challenge they were telling me, to trying to get the meeting rooms.
Is this their answer?
So Anto, my company actually has a WeWork-like business here in Richmond. WeWork doesn't have an operation here in Richmond, but there's an organization called The Gather, which has multiple locations and is structured very similarly. And we use their service. They typically have, I don't know, good 30 to 50 dedicated offices in each facility, plus an open area, plus 4 or 5 different meeting rooms of different size. You can reserve a conference room by the hour, based on the size. You schedule it ahead of time, and they have shared kitchen facilities and whatnot. It's very, very well done, very easy. Yeah, I have nothing but good things to say about this particular organization and how they run their business. And the price is very competitive.
Don't forget, well, it was a couple of weeks ago, we brought up the fact that many of the hotels are starting to do the extremely short-term book a room and have your meeting, have access to the food and so forth and so on. And you can book it for 2-3 hours or all day if you want. So I think this, with WeWork doing this, Steve, what you were just referencing, it's no doubt this is starting a trend a little bit, at least for foreseeable future.
Therese just commented that the rumors that Airbnb is getting into the hoteling office business. Maybe it's going to be under pressure because of their IPO. They're going to need to show some new angles. This could be interesting. It's kind of a combination of the two, right? It remains to be seen. Okay, let's move on to the main topic, which is edge versus the cloud, it being not binary. I'm going to share some slides that Alper has put together. Alper, are you ready to roll?
Yeah.
Off you go.
All right. So basically, there's not a singular cloud. There's different cloud instances out there. And the cloud is basically built upon the number of users connecting to a single instance. So you can go to the next slide. And the cloud computing, especially if you look at it from the perspective of AWS or others, the processing parts is all separated. The computing happens somewhere, the storage is on another location, analytics happens on another location, and visualizations happens on a different location. The reason for this is that, you can go to the next slide, the system is designed for perfect peak allocation for number of users. So if you have millions of users logging into your website for shopping, it can handle it. And the way it does it is basically separating the processes. You can go to the next slide. So this is great for scaling for number of users, but is this the right solution for building IoT? And the BIoT technologies are headless for valid reasons, right? So we haven't designed it for that. The reason is that we are not scaling for a number of people connecting to a single domain. We don't have to scale our buildings to thousands of users. If you look at a facility, how many people look at the BMS systems. It's not hundred thousands or 10,000. If it is thousands, we are lucky to have that many eyes on the system. And getting the data to cloud is costly, and cleaning the data on cloud is a lot costlier. So the architecture changes for our perspective. You can switch to the next one. So we don't need a headless technology here. Headless technology has its place for e-commerce or other kind of applications, but not IoT. So distributed edge computing is that we have limited amount of people connecting from the cloud. So you can go to the next slide. So this is basically scaled to 100 or 1,000 users. Next slide, please. So the next slide, you can switch to the next slide. So the server, you can go to the next slide, it just zooms into it. So the server in the cloud, the processes are not decoupled. It shouldn't be decoupled because we are dealing with time series data, and the applications that we utilize are not built for headless operation. And in here, we need to have the speed for the disk space, and they need to be right within the device. It can be in the cloud. I mean, these kind of services are in cloud, but they are not decoupled processes. You can go to the next slide. So the cloud part is that the data is securely pushed northbound. So we don't have to deal with the IT department, and it's a secured WebSocket connection. So by the time we get to the edge, everything is at the edge. So we can go to the next slide, Anton. So every device, we can zoom in. Every device basically has the capability to store the data right within it. Analytics is within it, and the systems are within it. Next slide. One more. And then you can also have a local cluster instance where limited amount of people only within that location can access the devices, sensors, controllers, or anything that is within that building. And that is pretty much it. Next slide ends.
Okay. Questions, thoughts?
Will our challenge, Alper, be that whilst maybe the current structure doesn't suit us with AWS and Google Cloud and Azure and stuff, that's what we're going to be stuck with anyway, because that's where people are going to want to park their data?
I'm not saying that we wouldn't be utilizing AWS or Google. AWS and Google has elastic computing computers where the hardware is not detached from the processes. They do have that offering. Yeah. It is basically selecting the right technology for the problem that we have, also the solutions that we utilize.
Other thoughts? But my comment is that you've picked a specific use case of the edge cloud, a specific kind of scenario. I think that the cloud is a lot more than that. The cloud is really sort of almost a communication tool, a communication mechanism. And there's lots of other sort of ways of actually thinking about the cloud, and it's not just the number of users, it's the fact that the cloud is always there, it's persistent. And I haven't formulated a sort of
I'm not against the cloud. Again, I'm talking about a specific implementation type in cloud. You can implement it headless way, you can implement it in cloud with a head way with the software that you utilize. So headless meaning is that your application APIs and where you store your data are decoupled from each other. They're in different computers. If it is in the same computer, you can still host it in the cloud, but it is a different way of implementing. It's still cloud, but it is headless versus headed systems. Which one is better for IoT type of applications? I am 100% confident that the headless way of doing things for building IoT will be a lot more costlier and a lot harder to maintain, because that is built for number of users connecting. That is the goal of it. That is the specific goal of it. But our problems are not number of users connecting to a single domain name. We have different problems and different priorities.
I think Jim Lee is one that's been sort of promoting that argument. It's not the number of users sort of argument.
Yeah, I think that from my perspective, it all depends on the different problems you're trying to solve. And if you go all the way back to the beginnings of distributed processing, we certainly have had and still have standalone devices. Someone had the great idea to network these things together to share that value. And I think there are plenty of applications where things can still be standalone. But when you go to the cloud or any kind of information sharing, it's because there's a hierarchical nature to the problem you're trying to solve. So somebody is trying to look over somebody else for quality control, for whatever reason. But it's really application based for me. And this continuum it's really not a new conversation than one we've had for the past 30 years. It's been weaponized by certain people that have different economic axes to grind. But from my point of view, same as it always was, it depends on the problem you're trying to solve. If you're trying to provide oversight for a number of disparate things, then networking it together is very interesting. Whether you do that by the cloud or some other method, if you don't share that data, you're not able to provide those value propositions. And some things are better standalone. So my view.
I think that brings us right to the theme of today. It isn't either or, it's both. It's a hybrid, and it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. And I think part of the reason we thought this would be useful is a number of us in our discussions came up with the same thing, that there seems to be factions saying it's only one way. You know, it's got to be all this, or got to be all that. And that's not helpful. And it can create the wrong understanding in building owners, clients, customers, right? It is a distributed computing world. How we want to connect those computing devices to achieve a certain goal has to be tied to the requirements of the application for the speed of processing, the ability to transfer data, the amount of users, the type of users, whether they have internet connectivity or they're just in the building sitting next to a piece of equipment that they want to make a change to, right? They shouldn't have to go out through the cloud to come back down to, change a set point in something that they're physically touching, right? But yet there is this kind of push that everything has to be solved by the cloud. It's not either or, right? That's the point of our conversation.
So I've got a question for John and Jim and Anno and I think Mark as well. So in the applications that you guys have maybe Ellsworth as well, the applications that you've developed that reside in the cloud, are they multi-tenanted, or are customers are you sharing one instance of your software or requiring essentially a dedicated instance of your software for each individual customer?
Multi-tenanted.
Multi-tenanted.
Yeah.
Same here.
Ours is.
Same.
Okay, so with that being the case, then where does that fit into Alper's argument about users? Because over time, that those tenants start to the number of users starts to scale. I would think to a reasonably significant number if your business is good.
Well, I think, again, that's the user side. There's other, get at what process are we trying to do in the building, right? What's the latency that we need to execute it by? My example is a self-driving car. The local process has to put on the brakes, right? And also, what do the users expect? I'm an energy engineer and I want to look at roll-ups and KPIs of energy data, right? I can get the KPI result out of the building instead of transferring all the data to the cloud to give me the KPI result.
Right.
We're doing part at the edge. There's still a role for the cloud, but it's not this kind of purist view that every single sensor value will be sent to the cloud before anybody can look at the KPI.
Yeah, no, I get it. I just wanted to get clarity around the multi-tenanting because that's,
Yeah.
because it
More-
ties
even
into
more-
what Alpha
even-
was saying in terms of the system architecture, the headless system architecture, which is, I don't know if you're taking advantage of that or not, but it's just wanted to clarify that.
Even with multi-tenanted, if we're talking about BMS systems,
Mhm.
Each customer has 100 people. If you have 1,000 different multi-tenants, that's 100,000 people.
Mhm.
That is not the headless shopping carts. They're created to manage millions of accesses to the system. So
Well, it's the ratio that you're talking about, really, isn't it, Alpha? I mean, we're talking about tens, hundreds, thousands of IoT devices for a low number of users. So to your point, Steve, even if you get more customers, you'll get more users, but the IoT side scales up with that.
Scales
too,
up
right?
far more relative to the number of users. Yeah,
Yeah.
got it. Okay.
And you can create another instance at that point if it cannot handle it. You can have one tenant on one instance. Maybe.
Which to John's point drives the need for edge computing, because we're limited, if you will, by the amount of data we have to process, not the number of users.
Right.
And it's just getting bigger and bigger as a number over time.
Yeah.
But and I think that's very germane to Alpa's point, right? From our perspective, the cloud model is inverted, right? Where cloud models were designed for millions of users. You know, you look at any large cloud deployment was designed for millions of users. We don't have millions of users. We barely have thousands of users, which is a different problem. But the data sources are in the millions, right? So
billions of data samples that we have to send up over a network if we're going to do all the work at the cloud versus the result over the network.
Well, one of the interesting things you get into is where is that processing done and what flexibility does that give you? So if you have a very flexible edge where you're able to change that programming, change that data acquisition on the fly, then it's very easy to do things at the edge. If, however, you have a very dynamic application, sending all that data up to the cloud and doing it in one location that acts on many also has great efficacy depending on the problem you're trying to solve.
It really comes down to the cloud just being another tool to utilize in your application, right? There are things that cloud processing and data aggregation and just the scale of things that cloud is suited for, but it doesn't mean it's suited for everything.
Yeah, the assumption is that cloud is big, therefore a lot of data should naturally go there. That's kind of the way.
I think it's not that it's big. I think that it's easy. I can scale up easily, right? I can add resources and servers and infrastructure, through a console versus putting servers in a rack and doing all that sort of stuff. So it's mainly about ease.
Well, I think what Anto's referring to though is unlimited storage, unlimited processing power, unlimited number of connections. I mean, it's big from that standpoint, right?
And that would never be the case on the edge. That's not the value of the edge.
I could argue against that, Anto. The more IoT devices the more IoT sensors you have, the more edge devices that you'll have that go with it.
Yes.
I think they scale together, right? It's not. I mean, the sensors need to connect to something at the end of the day, right? We are not in a place where a sensor sends its values directly, although it's not quite true. I guess Nest does. But there is a scaling up of the intermediate devices, and I think with the edge devices.
I wouldn't use the word unlimited either, right? I would use the word, greatly expandable, but there is a cost, right?
Yes.
You don't get unlimited AWS compute. You pay for more and more that you want. You don't get unlimited storage. You pay for more and more you want. You don't get unlimited data traffic. You pay for the more and more you want. And you have to look at the economic trade-offs. Again, I'll go back to the example. If we're trying to calculate a KPI, right? That's what the users care about. In order to do it, we need 1 million or 1 billion data samples to do it. Let's calculate that where we have the data, send the result to the user, right? So I wouldn't use the word unlimited because there are limits, right, on all of this. Yes, it can be extended and expanded very large, but you have to decide, is that what your data and your processes and your analytics are really about, right?
Well, and a big part of the cloud cost is your IO cost, right? It's not even the compute cost, it's the IO, the in and out the cloud, which is a large part of your cloud cost. And so
Yes.
you're doing a lot of,
surprise that costs more than the compute.
yes.
The point I'd like to make, though, is that we've been kind of focusing on temperature controls, energy analytics and stuff. I think we have to take a look at what you brought up originally, Anno, is video. And the other one that is hot on the trail of video is natural language. And now we have these devices that they basically cannot function without the cloud. And they require a greater relationship with the cloud than the kind of data that you're talking. We can push a lot of our data out to the edge as these edge devices are getting more powerful. And I think Alper's pointing that out very, very clearly. But some of these applications, such as video and such as natural language interface, and one of the big things with natural language is I think we're going to move more towards it because it tends to be an easier step to artificial intelligence. Once we start talking, then we're kind of right into that cloud environment, and it's kind of a different environment. And we're not going to have a lot of users, but we're going to have maybe more users and more input than we do with our traditional energy stuff. So it's
yeah, you're right. NLP is another good example of it's not binary. There's a whole bunch of processing done at the edge, and then the results are driven to the cloud for final processing and machine learning tech pieces. So it's another, yeah, you're right. Like video, it's another example of large volumes of data that doesn't need to be. You don't need to send every one of my words up to the cloud to analyze it.
Yeah, actually, the video is a great one because you got this one sensor that just gathers so much information. Where our temperature sensors, they really don't gather that much information. And so what you're saying is, if we need more temperature sensors, so we add more processing in our edge controller. But actually, these little cameras, they just stream a tremendous amount of data. So yeah, so they have a different relationship, I think, with the cloud than our traditional control stuff.
So John, do you want to go through your use case that you can?
Yeah, let's go through that use case, but I also want to kind of comment on Ken's. We're not talking about pushing data to the edge. I'm saying the data is at the edge. What we're talking about is the ability to push compute at the edge to do things with the data so we don't have to transfer all the data to the cloud. We can do some, much, all, or a small amount of that compute at the edge, depending on the application.
I think, John, is it people's perception of what is the edge? I mean, in most people's mind it's like a smart sensor. But if you start switching over and saying, okay, is it a door lock or a chiller? Because if you're looking at a chiller, it might have, I don't know, 20 sensors, but actually it generates, maybe 1,000 items of data because one, they got to do the control. Two, it's got to be instantaneous because it'll just break if it doesn't get the right commands at the right time. But it's generating huge amounts of data, but and doing processing and analyzing locally. For something like a door lock, yeah, it might have 2 or 3 items, but again, you can't waste that time if someone's walking up to it to actually open or register it with the information who's going through. But a chiller kind of defines that sort of break you're talking about, where it's generating lots of information, but not all that stuff needs to go up into the cloud. You need some data, and maybe this, once you step outside and you say you got to sequence the things and stuff, maybe that's done elsewhere, but the actual running of that, is a chiller an edge device? It kind of is in some sense.
Let's go to John's slides. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, so we like to point to this, from Harbor Research that, what we've been talking about. The reality is that it's not possible, cost effective, or even desirable to transmit every piece of data from every IoT device to the cloud before you get value, right? And again, that goes to your application. So let's look at the next slide. I like to bring this example up just to help people understand, right? The cloud and the edge are involved in the self-driving car, right? We can't wait to send the data up to the cloud to determine to turn on the brakes. That has to happen locally at the car. But we do send data on car movement up to the cloud so that we can determine where there are traffic jams. They're both valuable. You can't do the safe braking at the cloud, and you can't collect all the data to determine traffic jams at the edge. Okay, next. Also a number of myths. If you were to believe only the press releases, you would believe that artificial intelligence techniques and machine learning can only be performed at the cloud. Absolutely not true, right? The horsepower you have available, the size of the data set will be affected by your compute platform, but you can do plenty of machine learning and AI techniques at the edge, all right? But in the reverse, control can only be made by an edge device. That's not true either. If you send data up to the cloud, you may be able to make different types of evaluations, decisions, and then send control commands down to the edge. You have to worry about latency and other factors, but there's a lot of supervisory control that can be enabled and potentially done better at cloud. Next. So here's an example that we have with customers. It's for load management and demand response. In small to medium-sized buildings. There's over 3,000 sites. And one of their first constraints is they're connected over cellular modems, which means you pay through the teeth for sending data, right? So what they do is they collect the data on the edge device and they perform analytics on the edge device. And only the results go up to the cloud. And the results go up, help that portfolio manager, that utility, make better decisions on load management, demand response, and pricing, right? But they don't need all the data. They just need a selection of analytics generated results to go up to the cloud. And they've been able to make this cost effective and reliable by doing it that way. So the cloud then, because it can bring these results together, it'll execute demand response recipes that go down to the edge devices, go into mode 1, mode 2, mode 3. I don't know, I'm sure you see a lot of familiarity here and something that we used to work on together, right?
Yeah, it's familiar.
Yeah, but this now is going, all the way down to a small device, and because the analytics can run at the edge, they can make more deeper, intelligent decisions about how to do demand response and load management. So that's a real world application that uses both, but heavily relies on the edge data collection and the edge compute of those analytics, and only passing a small amount of results to the cloud.
So John, I recently looked at AT&T and Verizon's pricing for cell plans for IoT. And to your point, the data gets expensive fast. So if you're buying a 100 meg plan versus a 10 gig plan, it's dramatically different.
Hugely.
Yeah. So I think the starting price is like $6 a month, which seems cheap really. But when you're talking 3,000 sites, if that 6 becomes 60, now it's a huge bill.
Well, even more than that, you no longer have a viable application.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what this exactly was that. And this started, 4 years ago when those prices were even more severe for sending data.
So is
Yeah.
there a fundamental flaw here in kind of this whole model in terms of pricing for moving data? Is that something that we collectively need to be?
I don't know if it's a flaw or it's just reality, right? It's just reality that moving data, one of the things we talked about on our last call, if you want to put a whole lot of data on AWS, they tell you to mail them a disk drive.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is, to your point though, Tracy, is that there may not be a sufficient awareness of what it costs to transmit data and how much data we are talking about moving in a given application.
Yeah.
But it was pretty shocking to me, frankly, to just do that exercise recently to see the disparity. It's like 10x before you get to any kind of reasonable data that you're moving. And, on 3,000 sites, that's dramatic.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think our awareness and our because we're so used to a fixed price for something. Buy the software, you buy the hardware, it's a one-time cost, you're done.
Mhm.
And yet on a personal level, we're used to paying our monthly phone bill, and we're just sort of sucked up and doing it. And we just do it, right? But for commercial business purposes, like we're talking about here, this can be far outstrip the cost of the control system.
So does
This-
this
This
become
strikes me. I'm sorry,
Go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Jim. No, go ahead, Jim.
I was going to say that, with all the hype that I hear about 5G every day, this is exactly what goes through my mind. Everyone's convinced that, the market is trying to be convinced through rhetoric that this problem is going to go away with 5G. I don't see it.
It's
So,
going to get multiplied in my mind.
You're gonna charge more for it. It's
Yeah.
exactly.
Does that mean it becomes really a three-legged stool rather than just cloud and edge? You need the connectivity or the transportation of the information to be part of this, because one still doesn't work without the other with that other element.
That's what drives the decision of where am I going to collect this data, do what compute can I do here, what's most cost effective.
Yeah.
We have other applications and people bring it all to the cloud because they have their own internal network, right? And it's a private cloud, so they're not paying those data
Transaction
transfer
fees,
costs, and they feel they have a reliable enough network to their buildings. Yeah, we'll take it. We'll live with the chance that a couple of buildings go down once in a while. Great, that works for you.
Has anyone
It's fine.
seen?
System can
Sorry.
strengthen in the whole thing. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask, has anyone seen any movement or any change in direction by the cloud providers, AWS's, Azure's, or Google's, in the context of what IoT and edge computing is doing to their models? I haven't seen anything. I mean, all the tools and everything that we look at and use, I haven't seen any awareness of the cloud providers
Awareness
changing.
of these kind of things.
Yeah, edge versus cloud, because it has an impact on them, right? Because to John's point, I mean, if I'm living in the world, or to Albert's point, if I'm living in the world of it's all about users and less about the edge, then my model's like accordingly. And they haven't really, everything we're talking about is not everything, but a lot of what we're talking about is how to minimize those costs and infrastructure things that the cloud guys are doing.
So AWS is doing stuff on that realm, but their goal is to bring all the data to the cloud. And for that, they basically built a real-time operating system, or they took one real-time operating system, made it AWS, added the tooling for security. They're writing like applications like Lambda functions to get data from the edge devices, but not storing the historical data at the edge or doing anything with the edge within those. They want to just get the data and push it to the cloud. That is more of their strategy, so that the more data is in the cloud, the more money they will make.
Yeah, I get that, Alpha, but I mean, charging me the same pricing models, you can have all the tools you like, but if the price is going to be the price, I'm still not going to make it. I'm still not going to do it, right?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if the cloud guys are changing. Is there a point where the cloud guys suddenly flip over and go, okay, this whole edge thing is a threat to our data at the cloud, so we're going to provide a IoT business model that just obliterates any edge computing?
I think it's inevitable, but I don't
Yeah.
see signs yet that they have come to that realization, because just think about the internal cultural fit that, that you'd have to go through to change the thinking, right? So I think it's going to take time. In our conversations, it's not embraced and fully understood and not yet considered a threat. But
Right.
but the other things I read is, the future computing is at the edge, right? They'll, at some point in time, it'll flip again, right?
But
Gen-
the issue is how do they make money on the edge? How do they?
So you the infrastructure there too, right? Why not?
Right.
They're capable of doing it, right? Especially as more and more devices just become IP. Why can't you put a AWS box in the building, right? To handle all of the stuff that has to be handled at the edge, right?
Google did that for a while with search engines, right? I remember at one point we had a Google box in our IT rack, in our self-hosted facility where it did all of the searching and everything locally first before it went out to the cloud. So that's how they,
Microsoft Azure actually have an edge. It's called Azure Edge, which will allow for standard type containers and with a local cache. And they're trying to encourage people to actually put that and use it. And certainly that's something that they're promoting. How much they really mean it, I don't know, but there is a product called Azure Edge.
Oh, and then there's Dell's, what do they call it?
Gateway.
Edge Foundry.
Yeah, but theirs is to sell a bit of hardware. I mean, theirs
True.
is not what the other guys were trying to do.
Jim
that's
Butler,
kind of
did you have a point that you just sent a text over?
Yeah,
What-
yeah, thanks, Jim. Google certainly is aware that you want to do edge computing. The link I just posted is from their TensorFlow group. TensorFlow is let's call it a big machine learning library that they offer, and most people run it in the cloud or, in a tricked out PC, but they have a library for microcontrollers where you can do learning and run models at the edge in devices with really modest compute and storage capability. So I think that there's a realization that it's not one or the other, even for the big guys.
But as part of that, Google has a TPU, a tensor processing unit, which is specifically for this, designed for the edge. So it's all part of what you're saying.
Yeah, but it's not necessary to use their TPU.
Correct.
It's
You're
just
talking
much
about
slower.
this one, right, Jim?
You have to flip it, Alpha.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's the interesting part of that is if any of the cloud guys, move in a more positive direction about either obliterating edge or embracing it and creating different business models to embrace
that was
it.
kind of my point of the question. When you can identify when there's something broke or constraining like that, that's the point in time where somebody needs to change a business model here and break through, right? If they want this to really go to the level where, every electrical device is communicating something to the cloud, let's say, they've got to scale the pricing down still to accommodate that.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was coming from. And I haven't seen any movement in that direction. They're still using very consistent business models in their application, which causes us to do all these things that we're talking about, right?
Well, it's not just pricing. I mean, latency and reliability can completely eliminate any possibility of making the decisions or the control in the cloud, right? So there's multiple factors. Again, it's not one thing, right?
Right.
Privacy.
Yeah. So we're saying it's not binary.
Right. So it's not binary. We all agreed. So what do we learn out of this? I mean, what should we do differently as an industry, as players in the industry? What can we do? Or what can we say differently?
Well, I can tell you, just listening to everybody, I've picked up things I didn't know about or understand. So this is clearly something that's evolving over time. And just because you had a belief about one aspect of this 3 years ago doesn't mean it's the same today.
Yeah, right.
So you have to stay up on it all the time. Everything is changing all of the time.
And it's changing faster, I've noticed too. Right.
We spend a lot of our time educating because a lot of IT staffs, especially, are more cloud aware, cloud fixated, not as familiar with our concerns about latency and reliability and local control. And it just takes education, right? They just come from a different place and they literally do believe, no, everything should be in the cloud, right? So it's a big education and making people realize they both have a role and design their application to fit.
Whole IT/OT thing, basically. Yeah.
So my reaction is around, I completely agree with all this, the fundamental assessment of being binary, or as not being binary. It's both. But the telecommunications piece, we spent a fair amount of time talking about managed services in various aspects, but we talk about networks. but when we mention networks, we're talking usually about the in-building network, and as opposed to the telecommunications network, because in the IT world, they definitely differentiate. So your WAN and your internet costs are managed by the IT department, and you know, when we have to get more conversant and comfortable in presenting communication options to customers and to the contractor channels, et cetera, because it's going to very much factor into how you design the system at the end of the day, because it's a substantial part of the cost. It's, you know, we talked about all the upfront CapEx versus OpEx. This is an OpEx cost. And again, in IT world, you take those OpEx costs for granted. Now in our OT world, this is a significant OpEx cost that needs to be thought through when you put a design together.
Sorry, Steve, we had a customer the other day who was talking about, you're talking about CapEx versus OpEx, and it was, this application was a cell towers, but you know, the little control room that goes with the cell towers, and there's a generator in the cell towers. Well, I won't tell you what place or country or whatever. The biggest challenge they had was CapEx, because people were stealing the generators out. So
yeah,
it's a different kind of CapEx.
Different type of CapEx.
Right.
Shrinkage. That's shrinkage. In the retail industry, they would call that shrinkage, right?
It's a major shrinkage.
So what is the answer to a building owner or an IT department that just says, I want cloud?
That's a good question, but I was going to come at it from a different way. Who's really skilled at helping the building owner through this discussion more than anything, rather than him saying it should be cloud? How do you really help? Who are the people who can really help him work through what makes sense, right? Part of our challenge is that if the customer's large enough, he's going to have an IT guy who's got serious clout internally. You know, he's going to come with a view and a position, which will take a lot of effort to undo. So, you know, where are the consultants, experts, people who can help those customers really advise them?
Is this the rise of the MSI role? I know where, you know, they sit between both sides and they're actually acting as a consultant for the customer, but making sure that actually practically everything can A, integrate, B, get the data to where it needs to be done, and taking all the different services and bringing it together. And these guys are beginning to evolve, you know, where they've just evolved from the SI going on and moving on, and now becoming really those guys that have got their own software people. They've got the consultants and contractors, and people are putting their trust in them to make the whole thing pull together and work and function and get their guidance from them.
Or is it an opportunity for IT consultants, the big consulting firms, which is Jim Lee's favorite topic?
But I think these are smaller guys at the moment.
I know, yeah.
But I mean, my problem is that I can't name any building owners that I've talked to that are concerned whether it's cloud or edge. It's really all about the overall value proposition that you're trying to sell and what it is. And we don't have conversations very often with people about that, unless it's, you know, people that are in that very small percentage that are basically technology enthusiasts. You know, really what we're talking about is the value proposition, and whether it's cloud or edge, some of these things that John or Steve brought up, those have to do with the cost of communication and what you're selling. And to me, it's about value proposition, and the technical details will sort themselves out accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, right? I mean, the price change is every discussion. You can have all the technology you want, but if the price is significantly different. Yeah.
Until the first thought that came to my mind when you asked that was, that's a red flag for me. Because there's a whole lot of analysis that really should go into that decision. And have they really done that? Do they really understand what they're talking about? Or is somebody just sold them on the cloud is perfect, it's got backup, it's unlimited, it's, blah, 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 right? So,
But what do you do then? What's your response to that person with?
well,
the
my
request?
first question is why? Tell me why you think that, or why you want that, and start to explore their reasons behind that.
My first question would be, what is your budget?
Or what are you trying to do?
Yeah,
What is
what
what
are the
you
services you're trying to get out of this? You know, you're trying to have some sort of BIM animated solution. You want, storyboard data, you want energy management. What is the service you want to get out from this data you're going to put in the cloud?
Which is back to Jim's point. What's the business problem you're trying to solve?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
I mean, that's pretty sort of classic sales kind of approach. When somebody asks for something that's kind of nonsensical, you go to the, what is it that you really want?
Well, the beauty about the non-binary position is it's the flexibility, right, we have at the end of the day. I think cloud versus edge and it's not binary gives us a lot of flexibility of what's the right solution for the right cost for the customer. It's not a one size fits all. We've got a lot of flexibility, a lot of capabilities. Technology is changing fast, like we talked earlier. And like Tracy said, you've got to keep on top of the technology, which makes it a lot more interesting to solve some of these problems for the business owners.
And it really makes me think there's an emerging business model here that's somewhere between traditional contractors and integrators and traditional IT departments, right? And I think, and I look at the people on the screen here and the knowledge of that kind of goes from the center towards both of those. That's not something that you find everywhere. And it's typically not something you find on either end of that scale, right? A typical integrator doesn't understand the cost variations of cloud application. And an IT guy doesn't typically understand the needs of sensors and local systems in terms of latency and so forth. So
I think
So
that's
we
the number.
need an edgy MSI, right?
yeah,
Edgy.
edgy MSI. Right?
Or a cloudy BaaS contractor.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, any final words, Alper or John, put together the use cases? Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's a good topic to discuss. I think there's a lot of confusion out there in the market. So.
I would like to add one thing. Whatever technology you're buying, like let's say if you bought a Tesla, know that it is an electrical car. Don't try to put gas on it. So if you're buying a technology, know the technology stack that is in it and where it should be installed to, how it should work and things like that. And choosing the technologies accordingly would be a perfect outcome for them.
Yeah.
Wise word from Alper. Thank you very much. So that brings us up to the top of the hour. Thank you, everybody. This has been a great conversation. I'm sure we'll continue it in some other form next week. Thanks all to the attendees for being here. The video of this will be up by tomorrow morning. And hope everybody that's in the UK and in the US have a great Thanksgiving. And we'll see you next week.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
Thanksgiving, guys. Enjoy your time off with your
Bye-bye.
families.
Thanks, Roger.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.